Hey everyone, we got together with Brother James Poitras while he was ministering here in Ontario and had a great conversation. Hope you enjoy.
When we were preparing for the interview, someone had mentioned that after you got saved, 3 years after you got saved, you were already on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's amazing. But if you wouldn't mind starting from the beginning and just telling us, what were the events leading up to being brought into the church, first experiences, just kind of give your testimony when you came into the church.
Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and tell you part of the story that I hardly ever tell, probably just about 2 or 3 times in my entire life.
Awesome.
So my story started when I was living in a border town in New Brunswick, St. Stephen, which is right across the border from Calais, Maine.
Okay.
I grew up in a broken home. It was an abusive home. There would be times that I would be kicked out of home in the middle of the winter. I'd go outside and I would sit on this rock that was close to where we lived, and I could just look across the river to the United States. And in that river there was like these stones. It was almost like a little island. And I thought if there was some way that I could just get over there to that island, then all of my problems would just be totally over. So when I was going through school, all I could think of is there's got to be some way that I can escape from this mess that I'm in. There's got to be something better than what I'm experiencing right now. And when I graduated from the high school in St. Stephen, I went to the University of New Brunswick, basically because I was trying to escape home. I was in my second year there studying to be a teacher, and I was putting myself through school, working at a department store. I'd worked at the Metropolitan, what they called the Metropolitan in those days. They had one in St. Stephen. I had worked there. When I went to Fredericton, I also worked there. When I'd go to class during the day, there was a person there from Kenya. I knew that there was something different about him. And then I would go to work, and there would also be someone there. There was a young lady there, and she was just such a tremendous young person. She was 18. I was 19 at the time. I knew that I liked her. I knew that there was something different about her. On a Saturday night, I asked her for a date, and for the next day. She said that wasn't going to be possible because she was going to be going to church. I thought, I've been to church before. I've been to church many times before, and I could really, go to church for you, with you. I went to church on that Sunday night at a church called Life Tabernacle. And as soon as I sat down there, I knew that I was not going to be able to date this young lady.
Wow.
To me, it was so visual. I could see very clearly that I wasn't just like them. I remember that night that someone began to speak in a language that I didn't understand. And I thought, this is really cool. I'm in a church where there are people from all over the world. I didn't realize that the person was given a message in tongues, an interpretation of tongues. I have no idea who the preacher was that night. It was an evangelist. I don't know what he said. I didn't understand the screeching preaching. I didn't understand the words of the choir. I only understood one thing. There was something different about that place. There was something in that place that I knew I wanted to have.
Wow.
And they gave an altar call. Every church has a culture, the way we do things around here. I went down to the front on the left-hand side. I didn't realize that that's where the women prayed in that church. They would pray so many things, loosen up, let go, all of this stuff. And somebody stopped me and asked me if I'd ever read Acts 2:38 before. I didn't even know there was a book of Acts, to tell you the truth. And I probably lied to the guy.
Yeah, I've read it.
Anyway, he opened up the Bible, read Acts 2:38, And that was the night that my life forever changed. The young lady's name was Lynn Jewett, is Lynn Jewett. She later became an aimer, also a missionary, very good missionary. The thing I think about Lynn all the time is that so many times young people think that they can go overseas to prove their ministry, but I think it's the other way around. You prove your ministry here at home, you do something here at home, and the Lord allows you to go somewhere else in the world. So that's kind of my story. I grew up wanting things to be different, life to be changed for me, and came into contact with a Pentecostal group, came into contact with the Lord, and it was forever changed.
Had you ever, in your childhood or teenage years, had you ever cried out to God in your room, or just any escape you were looking for, or had you had a moment where you're, God, if you're there, I need you, like, or show yourself?
I grew up with a mainline church, planning that I would go ahead and be part of that church forever, be a minister for that church. Realized that I probably wouldn't do that because I was interested in getting married, so that kind of canceled that part of it out of the picture. I don't remember ever crying out like that. I wish I knew enough that I would have been able to do that. I always believed that I was going to rise above my situation, but thought that I was going to be the one that was responsible for that.
Gotcha. So you came into the church, and what happened next? You spent time in New Brunswick?
I went ahead and graduated from university. At the time, going to university, especially when we were in the same town as the Bible school, it wasn't considered to be the most spiritual thing to do. There were people that recommended that I go ahead and quit school. For some reason, I think because my mother had ingrained in us, if you start it, you go ahead and finish it. So I went ahead and finished the schooling there at the University of New Brunswick. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the Lord has enabled me to be the Director of Education and AIM for Global Missions for the UPCI, because I did have that training at the university there.
That's awesome.
So I finished university there in my final year. I don't know if they have that in Canada anymore, but there was a group called CUSO, Canadian University Services Overseas. I had always been interested in missionary work. Even before coming to God, there was always this determination that I was going to be involved in Africa. Can't explain that, but that's the way it was. When I came into the church, going to the altar, I'd pray, I would see in my mind, I would see African people. I couldn't ever get away from that. So when I was about to graduate from university, CUSO was advertising for teachers overseas, and they advertised for Nigeria, which is in West Africa. So I applied for that. I also knew that because I was a new convert, that I really needed to be in a place where there would be a local United Pentecostal church. Wrote the missionaries, didn't hear from them like 6 months. Didn't hear from this dear missionary family that was in Nigeria at the time. So I decided to go ahead and withdraw the application from CUSO because I didn't want to get a contract, then go to some part of Nigeria where there weren't any churches at all. As soon as I let CUSO know that I wasn't going to be available, then Brother Rodenbush called from headquarters, said, I've just been to Nigeria, they're so interested in you coming.
Wow.
And he said, amazingly, the person responsible for assigning teachers in Nigeria with CUSO is a friend of the missionary family. They've said that they'll go ahead and be able to place you somewhere close to the missionaries. And I'm like, I am so sorry, I have already withdrawn the application.
Wow.
So he said, well, if you want to go for 3 or 4 months, then let's go ahead and do that. Go in the AIM program for 3 or 4 months. And I went and have never really turned back from that interest in emphasis on missions.
Mm-hmm. How long after AIM did you transition into full-time missions?
I went on AIM after 3.5 years. I graduated from UNB, taught for a year, went on AIM for the 3 or 4 months. While I was on AIM, I received the Sheets for Christ scholarship to go to what was UPBI in those days, United Pentecostal Bible Institute,
Yes.
now NCC. Got the scholarship from Sheets for Christ, which paid for all of the schooling at UPBI except for the food. So I had this dilemma: do I go ahead and remain on AIM, or do I go back to Bible school? And I decided to go to school that year for a couple of reasons. One, because I was a new convert. I wasn't very well known in my district. And I really thought that if I was going to spend my life with missions, you need to have a good tie to your home district. So that was one thing. The other thing is that I looked at the school and I thought, if I'm going to be involved in Bible school work for the next how many years, it would be good to have that foundation. So I actually went to UPBI, not so much because of what I thought I was going to learn there as far as the content of the classes were concerned, but more learning how they operated their school. So if you look at our Global Missions Bible College program now, you can pretty well go ahead and date it back to what I learned while I was at the Bible school there.
It's a fairly calculated decision to go and study.
So I went to school just for a year at UPBI and finished, I think they graduated like in April. Of course, I didn't graduate from there, but the school finished, I think it was in April. Within a week, I was back on the mission field.
Okay,
back in Nigeria.
Yep.
Started writing a young lady, not Lynn Jewett,
Lynn Jewett.
which eventually became my wife. She was also an aimer in Nigeria. She has a solid background in the Apostolic movement, so that really, I felt like that really augmented my life in ministry, because what I didn't have, she has that.
That's cool.
So yeah, 3.5 years in the church, went on AIM, was on AIM less than 2 years. I went a week before my 23rd birthday on AIM, and I was appointed as a full-time missionary within 2 years after that.
Okay.
It's kind of unheard of, someone being in the church for 5 years and being appointed as a missionary.
That's what stood out to me, because it almost seems like nowadays it's a much longer process that I've seen for people to get on the field. And
well, I think the global missions, called foreign missions in those days, I think they took a chance with me. But I also had people that believed in me. So when I look at young couples that meet our global missions board now, personally, and I think that other board members would do the same thing, I don't look just at what the person is right now. I try to be visionary enough to see what they're going to be able to do in the future. So for me, it's not, you meet this young couple, it's not, what are they right now? I think that does come into play. You can feel their heartbeat, you can see their vision, you can see the sacrifice that they've made, but it's more than that. It's looking down the road and somehow seeing what they can be in the future.
see the potential.
And I feel good about that, because I think that's what happened with me, that they looked at the way that I was, and there were some accomplishments at that point. And my wife was a pastor's daughter, a small church, but the church was he was very well known as far as the church was concerned, so solid footing there. And they believed in the vision and took that chance. And however many years later.
How long were you in Africa? In Nigeria specifically?
I was in Nigeria for 12 years.
Okay.
Thought I was going to remain there until I died. We loved Nigeria. And the Lord transition took place, and we were eventually led to go to Ghana, which is another West African country.
Yep.
We were there for 16 years, so 28 years before we came to the headquarters.
Tell us a little bit about the work in Nigeria, how it started, what your tasks were, if you had a mandate when you were in Nigeria, and what you guys saw God accomplish through you and through the church and the local body?
Very good. I think that if you could go ahead and tell me what your favorite scripture is, I could probably tell you God's mandate in your life.
Sure.
Because that's a life scripture.
Yeah.
So for me, it was 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. So the things that I have received and have been entrusted into me, I'm to go ahead and entrust those into other faithful men and women. So for the whole time, it's been that. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2.
Wow.
I think it's very important for all of us to realize, first of all, we all have a ministry. Mm-hmm. What's the ministry? Don't try to be like somebody else. I'm not going to be Lee Stone King. I'm not going to be Charles Robinette. I'm not going to be Mark Schutz. Mm-hmm. I'm Jim Poitras. So I may as well be the best Jim Poitras that I can be.
Yeah.
So life isn't all about trying to be better than somebody else. Life is about trying to be better than yourself. So for me, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, and the word teach, that's what I do. I am a teacher. And I believe that the teaching ministry is the revival ministry of the Apostolic movement. I'm very confident that I serve a God. Nicodemus had it almost right when he said, I know that you are a man sent from God, that you are a teacher sent from God. He was almost right. We serve a God that came to teach. So it's always been about teaching. And I think that we go ahead and define our vision, and everything that we do is somehow focused through, lined up, aligned with that vision that God has given. Every life decision. Mm-hmm. I only became the director of education in AIM because that was in line with the vision. Mm-hmm. If someone said, Brother Poitras, do you want to be the next district superintendent of the Ontario district? Not a chance. That is not in line with the vision.
Yeah.
So Nigeria, Ghana, I worked on establishing the Africa Bible College program, now the Global Bible College program. It's all because that's in direct alignment with my vision and my life verse, which is 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2.
Wow. Can you give us a story or example of a time that stands out? I know there's probably many, but a time that stands out in the early stages of being full-time missionaries where God blew your mind, where God showed up in a way and provided or provided safety, or the provision of God was just miraculous.
Well, God is constantly blowing my mind. But when I got married to my wife Linda from Alabama, she's from Alabama, I went to Alabama, never had been to the South before. My brother was the only other person that I knew at the wedding. So 2 Canadians and all of these Southern folks, hugging, loving Southern folks. And so got married there, and we went back to the mission field 3 weeks later. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that I would ever recommend it for anyone else, but that's what we did. We went back to the mission field 3 weeks later. The missionary that we were working with was on furlough. Another missionary that was in the country left within 1 week of us going back. An AIM family that we were working with, they left almost immediately as well. So we were there alone in a country that at the time was probably 130 or 140 million people.
Yep.
I had been in the church by that time about 4 years, so there was that to contend with as well. And 92 students in the Bible school in a village where the village had donated the property. It was about 50 acres of property. Then they decided that they wanted to go ahead and have their land back because land is very important in cultures like that. When we didn't give them the land back, they decided that they wanted to go ahead and try to take it by force. They didn't try to take it by force. They took it by force. At one particular night, I was there at the Bible school. They came on the compound at night, destroyed the generator. They started breaking windows. They had it in their mind to rape the female students, which by the Lord's grace never really did happen. These students started running into what you'd call the jungle. We called it the bush, so the jungle. And I was there, and I still remember it so clearly. They said, Brother Jim, come in here, I got in the corner of this room, this little dorm room, and I can see myself right now up in that corner. And right next to me, there was a glass window. They came and they broke that glass, and I was standing in that corner, and all I could hear was Sister Rodenbush saying, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. As often as she repeated it, I stood there. But when I stopped hearing that voice, I jumped out of that window, jumped into the car, headed across what they call a football field. There are people that jumped in that vehicle. I didn't bother stopping and looking to see, who was in the back seat or whatever. I just hightailed it out of there. When that happened, there was a young Bible school student that had rushed to our home where we were staying, our apartment where we're staying, and knocked on the door. My wife answered, and he started saying, Sister Poitras, oh, I'm so thankful for the sacrifice you people have been making here. Your husband is probably going to be killed. And she's thinking, I just got one, and now I'm going to lose one. She was evacuated away from there. It was still 2.5 years later.
You could go back.
We stayed there.
Yeah.
Even after that, we stayed in that town, that village, for 2.5 years or something like that, until the Lord had, maybe even longer than that, until the Lord had directed us away from there.
Wow.
Because I remember when we moved to Enugu, we had our first child, Melinda, and we had to be evacuated from that village. And when we were moving away from there, sent my wife off to this little church, and she's in that church singing, it's amazing what praising can do, and just believing God in this, in the midst of all this chaos and trouble. And I would just go into our place, grab the wedding album, because that's the most important thing to a woman. And for me, I don't know why it was, but I just went to the closet and I took all of these baby dresses. We had bought baby dresses for the different ages, like 1, 2, 3, 4. So as we progressed along, we'd have clothes for Melinda. So like those baby dresses, they were like gold to me. And put them in the car, and away we went. I will say this, looking back, I think that was probably one of the strongest times in my life as far as commitment is concerned. And looking at those students that went through that, some of the most committed students that I've ever taught would have been during that time period.
Wow.
So that's an example.
Yeah, I could hear examples like that all day. And I'm sure 28 years on the field, there's an endless amount of examples.
There's a few of them.
Yeah. Can you speak to 28 years on the field? What were some of the reasons that you came off the field from full time and decided to work with headquarters?
Oh my. I would like to think that it goes back to a very foundational principle to me, that the will of God isn't somewhere at the end of the rainbow, the pot of gold that's at the end of the rainbow. Mm-hmm. That the will of God for me is just finding and doing the next right step. Yeah. There's a scriptural verse that talks about light and lamp, that His word is a light unto our path, it's a lamp unto our feet. Yeah. And when you think about a lamp in the night, the lamp is only showing you a short distance. It's only showing you the next few steps. So you just tend to do the next right step and develop your ministry and your talents I remember thinking that I don't need a position to accomplish God's vision in my life. It's not position-based, it's call-based. So I don't need a position to accomplish God's vision and purpose in my life.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes the organization needs our abilities to accomplish their vision and their purpose.
Yep.
So for me, that's basically what happened. I felt like I was uniquely suited for
Cool. Yeah, definitely.
what I'm doing now.
Definitely.
And you have to go through quite a few, I'm not sure I should call them hoops. There's a process that you have to go through, which kind of confirms the will of God for your life. I do know that since going to headquarters in the last 6 years, there's been so many confirmations. My wife has had some health issues that we wouldn't have been able to remain on the field. Mm-hmm. And her to be able to follow up with the appointments and things that she needs every 3 to 4 months. So to me, there's been not just that, but so many confirmations. When I look back at my life, and so that was 28 years on the mission field, and then almost 6 years with Global Missions at the office. When I look back over all of that, if I had to live life all over again, I'd do exactly the same thing.
That's an amazing
I'd
place.
go ahead and live my life doing
Exactly.
missions.
Yeah.
However, I'm not going to be able to live my life all over again. So I want to make sure that I spend the remaining part of my life helping other people that want to go ahead and invest their life in missions. So that's kind of where I'm at. And of course, when you go ahead and make any major decision, even the one of coming to headquarters, I like to think that I've got a kitchen cabinet of counselors. About a month ago, I spoke to the Global Missions Board in a devotion, and I looked around the room, and there were probably 6 or 7 people in that room that I would never make any major decision in my life without consulting with them. And there are others even outside of that room. In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. So, yeah, consulted counselors and was asked to be the director of education name. So that's a big thing.
Yeah, you didn't ask? You didn't ask them?
No.
Oh, that's good.
Did not go ahead. I was naive enough to believe, and I'm hoping that I'm still believing this, that you don't have to politic to accomplish God's will in your life.
Can you give after 28 years in the field, can you give an overview of how you left it? Kind of some of the, the things, an overview of what God had accomplished in those 28 years.
In the case of Ghana, which would have been the last country that I was a missionary to, was the superintendent of that country for probably about 10 years. Probably one of the youngest superintendents in the world at the time. When I became an area coordinator, one of the youngest, if not the youngest area coordinator at the time. In those days, it's like he's got wisdom beyond his years. And, unfortunately, it's been a long time since I've heard anybody say to me, you know what, Brother Poitras, you just have wisdom beyond your years. So there's that. But worked with the church in Ghana, which was a very mature church, to bring them to the point that they were what we call nationalized, self-governing, self-supporting, self-propagating, having their own leadership.
Yeah.
So worked with them until that particular point, which I think happened probably in 2006. And surprisingly to them, actually stayed with them after the church was turned over to national leadership.
Okay.
So was their superintendent, and then just became kind of more like the friend on the side, rather, like the guide on the side instead of the expert on the stage type of thing.
The guide on the side, I like that.
I like to say the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage.
That's good.
So took the back seat, which sometimes can be uncomfortable,
Sure.
but stayed with them until the time that Brother Howell and others asked me to do my present responsibility. So left them at the point of nationalization, stayed with them after that, And I think the cool thing is that also left with them some of the greatest missionaries on the planet. So we have Nick and Pam Cisco there as missionaries, and we also have Colleen Carter there. There are others that are involved there,
Yep.
but those are missionaries under full appointment.
How many churches in Ghana?
I would say probably about 250, something like that.
Wow.
Churches and preaching points.
Yeah. How many Bible school points or?
They have a major Bible school in the capital city. I think they have a night school program that just recently has started there. And then they have several extension programs throughout the country.
Wonderful. Because of the nature of the church now, and there's so many new people coming in, can you give us an overview of your current position, what it looks like, what your kind of day-to-day looks like, what your mandate, I know your mandate from your scripture stands, but what your mandate from the general board is?
Okay.
Because a lot of people coming in don't know the inner workings of, the structure of the church.
Well, when it comes to global missions, and we have 4 executives at the headquarters that work with global missions. Then we have 6 regional directors that are part of the global missions administrative team, and they work around the world. Among the 10 of them, I have the coolest job of any of them because I deal directly with the future of global missions in the United Pentecostal Church. So I deal with the future missionaries of the UPCI with the short-term missionary programs. So we deal with the grassroots missionary programs that train young people and older people to become the missionaries of the future. So there's that. And then the other major responsibility is with our Bible colleges, Bible schools, and there's about 489 of them presently outside of the United States and Canada. So work with the Bible School Development Program. There's a program called GATS, the Global Association of Theological Studies, working with all sorts of curriculum development. Ocean College had asked me the other day about books that I've written recently, and I was surprised that when I sat down to try to calculate, I thought maybe I'd written about 10 books. And I started writing them down, and there's probably like 19 or 20 books that I've written, and they're just part of curriculum that we have. So a lot of curriculum development, leadership development, the School of Missions, the short-term missionary programs, which range from programs that we have in North America, like Go Next seminars, Global Connections, and then the programs that we have on the field, which would be Next Steps, which is 8 weeks, the AIM program, which we deal with people 2 months or longer.
Yes.
Just a full range of short-term missionary programs, which are constantly changing. I met with my staff this last week and said, I want you to put a booklet together about the short-term missionary programs that we have. And we actually use an umbrella. It's an umbrella of programs, a whole array of different programs that we have. I want you to put together a booklet and social media cards. How many social media cards have we just done? So they said, well, 5,000. I said, okay, very good. And probably booklets, I want you to do about 5,000. And I want you to keep in mind, by the time you get rid of those social media cards, and by the time that we pass out these 5,000 booklets, short-term missions will have changed. It's a moving target. It's always changing.
Yeah.
The mission remains the same. The Great Commission remains the same. But our methods of how we get people involved in a global harvest, they don't have to remain the same. So it's it's not kind of an exciting job. It is an exciting job because it deals with the future.
How are they changing?
Wow. Some of the ways that they're changing is that in access challenge countries, you can get into access challenge countries doing work like teaching school, like you had mentioned in China, or other places as well. Japan is another place. We can get people into Japan doing teaching in schools. Missionaries in the past have gone and they have remained there forever. Some of them have been like the Lone Ranger, and having that mentality. The younger groups tend to operate more in community, that they like to do things as a group. The methods that we're using, the length of programs. I think that, and I'll mention that in a seminar or presentation that we're doing this afternoon, I don't think that God has called all of us to be missionaries, but I do think that He has called every one of us to be a global Christian. And the way that happens is just not the same for everybody and for every period of life, both past, present, and future.
Yeah. For people coming in to the church, because you were someone who had come in and God had placed vision on pretty quickly. So I know a lot of young Christians that have so much zeal, and they're very genuine and passionate, but very genuine about living for God and living right. Any advice to a young man who comes in and then God is speaking to him about vision and passion, and just advice for how he could handle, this whole new onslaught of emotions and direction in life that he might not have had before? How did you kind of funnel all of that through a new Christ-centered vision and reality?
Well, the Lord really blessed me. I came into the church because of Lynn Jewett. And but I stayed in the church because of a family. Their names were Fred and Ruby Thompson.
Okay.
They were just members of the local church. They were strong members of the local church. And in that first 3 years of me being in the church, there was crisis that happened in our local church. I would have never stayed, but I was anchored to this family who spoke into my life. They invested in my life. I remember one time that I did something so silly in the local church I was part of. And when I stepped away from that, I had to deal with Fred Thompson. And he said, "Jim, for someone that is supposed to be so smart, you sure just did something that was so stupid." 35, 36, 37 years later, when I'm about to do something that's just totally dumb, I just hear that. I hear this voice, "Jim, for someone that's supposed to be so smart, you sure are about to do something that's just so
I like it.
stupid." So there's that. Also, I already mentioned that the will of God is finding and doing the next right step.
Yeah.
And I tell people today, if you, in your finding the next right step, if you are pursuing your next right step without the consultation of your pastor, it's just the wrong step.
It's good.
So I like to think that every step of the way, the pastor is involved every step of the way. So I think in answer to your question, right from the very word go, you submit to that pastor. I know this is old school talk, but you submit to that pastor. You express your burden to that pastor. And you believe that the pastor has the best interests at heart for you. There's this leadership philosophy that says, don't ever seek counsel from someone that has something to gain or to lose from the counsel that they are giving. Sometimes I ask people, an audience, like how many people agree with that statement? Almost without fail, everybody will raise up their hand and say, yeah, that's just totally right. But it's wrong.
Can you repeat it quickly?
People who say, don't seek counsel from someone that has something to gain or to lose from the counsel that is being provided. Okay. So what they're saying is, don't talk to your pastor. If you want to draw it out that way, don't talk to your pastor because, he has something to lose by you being involved in global missions. But I think that spiritual men and women that are spirit-filled, that when they counsel people, they look beyond what's good for them, what's best for them, and they look at what's best for the individual and what's best for the kingdom.
Yeah.
even with the aimers that I've trained in the past and continue to train, I don't look for what's best for me. I try to look at what's best for them. And there's people even on my staff that God is bringing them to the place where they may go ahead and leave me. And when I counsel them, I try to look for what's best for the kingdom, direct them for what's best for the kingdom.
That's good.
Because that also, I've never thought about it this way before now, but it also broadens my influence. You can't keep it locked up in four walls, and you can't keep God locked up into some sort of box. So that's probably a few things right there. Time spent, we say this, that God calls, which I know that He does, and then they say, whom God calls, He equips. And people think that time from the promise to the fulfillment of the promise is just this straight line. But that's not the way it is. No. The time from the promise to the fulfillment looks a whole lot more like this.
An economic chart.
Yeah, it just looks, it's just not that way. Straight line, flat line. Whom God calls, He equips. If God speaks to you and says, you know what, Caleb, I'm going to use you to do something great. I'm going to use you to shake this world. You better be shaking at the time. Because the process that He takes you through, His school is a totally different thing. And it's just not this easy, straight line thing. I'm going to make you great. You're going to win the world. Yeah. I don't pray for patience. I know that my wife probably prays for me to have patience. My kids probably. My staff probably pray for me to have patience. I never pray for patience because I know the book well enough to know that tribulation worketh patience. And James Poitras and pain, not in the same sentence. When I came into the church, there was all this discussion, is just going to come pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. And I thought, you know what? I just want to be ready whenever He comes. So I'm pan-trib, just be ready. But my prayer is that it's not post-trib, because me and pain, no, thank you. I just don't really want that. So,
it changes you. And if you have pain and you funnel it correctly through Christ, it's one of the most humbling spiritual experiences too, actually. But one of the last questions I had was, if you could, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten from a missionary is actually Brother Robinette, and he said, the light that shines the furthest, the light that shines the furthest shines the brightest at home. And it's a wonderful piece of advice that all of our team has applied to our ministry and our lives. And if you had, if you could sum up a piece of advice for my generation and the generation below us in a paragraph or two, what would that be?
Oh my.
There's a word counter. You got, oh my is already 2.
Yeah, the toughest things in life for me, that's my response. Oh my.
My, oh my. I know it's a broad question, and I know there's tons of advice that needs to be given. You've spent your life giving that advice. Well,
just going back to what I said, whom God calls, He equips. Don't expect it to happen just like that. When the Spirit of God, the Holy Ghost, was outpoured at Azusa Street, those people that received the Spirit, speaking in other tongues as God's Spirit gave the utterance, they believed that they were being empowered, equipped to go to the uttermost parts of the earth to preach the gospel. History tells us that within hours, they bought tickets. They were one-way tickets. They packed their stuff in coffins because they believed they'd never come back again. The Lord did meet them at the point of their faith, by the way. Many of them did die. They did not come back.
Yeah.
They boarded boats. They went overseas, and it's sad, but it's also humorous to me when I visualize these new missionaries. They think that they're empowered, and they get off the boat and they start speaking in tongues to these nationals, and they get the shock of their life because they realize that the tongues that they received most of the time was not the language of the culture that they felt called
that they were
to.
going to, yeah.
And they thought that because God called, He equipped instantaneously.
Yeah.
What they didn't realize that God empowered, but it takes time to equip.
Yeah.
So that would be the advice that I would
good.
give to younger people. Just remember that it just doesn't happen instantaneously. The time that you spend equipping yourself for your ministry is time that is very well spent. And don't push God faster than He wants to be pushed. Don't get ahead of God. Don't get behind Him.
Yeah.
Get in step. Stay in step.
That's awesome.
And for someone like you, I was thinking just a few minutes ago, I know that you've gone through a very difficult time in your life, and but God is going to use that. You're going to be more sensitive to others because of the experience that you have.
I hope so.
And you're going to be able to minister in a totally different dimension than those that haven't gone through experiences like that you've gone through. So you see God in your situation, in your experience, and know that you'll be more sensitive to people than you've ever been before,
I hope so.
and that many of us have ever been before.
Thank you so much for the Poitras. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
God bless.
God bless you, sir. My leg hurts. My leg's been crossed for so long.